Welcome back. South Africa will be getting a new Chief Justice this year. Recently, the Judicial Services Commission held interviews as part of the process to replenish the bench at the Constitutional Court. The current term of Mogoeng comes to an end in September into October, seeing Mogoeng wrapping up his 12 years at the helm. Just to get a better understanding of the kind of individual likely to occupy the Chief Justice position, I'm joined now by former Constitutional Court Judge, that's Albie Sachs. Justice Sachs, good afternoon. It is a pleasure to speak to you this afternoon. Just give me your sense, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the conversation about a suitable individual to occupy the position of Chief Justice. Let's start broadly about the state of the judiciary as one of the three legs of the tripod that balances our constitutional democracy. What's your sense? At different points in our 27-year history, we've seen the various legs wobble a little bit. What's your reading of the current status of this leg of the tripod?
Okay, first of all, let me say I'm biased, completely biased, but I think the strongest leg, the strongest by far, not just now, but over a number of years, have been the judiciary. And maybe it's partly because, when you're a judge, you're separated from the politics, the hurly-burly, the ambition, the getting on. That's number one. Number two, we were a college, a team, working together, an inspired team. And I think we've created an institution that goes beyond the individuals who compose that institution. So certainly looking at the top, the Constitutional Court, I think it's very powerful. It's functioning very well. It's got enormous public esteem and prestige. But I must confess, that's where I was, and I'm totally biased, but I think there's very, very good reason in favor of the judiciary. That's not to put down Parliament and not to put down the presidency, all of which have shown capacities for kinds of leadership in their spheres, the legislative and the presidential executive, also very, very strong.
And you can say that even despite the criticism that we've seen the judiciary being subjected to recently, including what is out-and-out attacks on the judiciary, and also despite some of the, what shall we say, questionable conduct that has been called out by institutions such as the Judicial Services Commission, and without asking you to specifically comment on specific instances, but citing that that calling out has gone as high as to even call out the current Chief Justice.
Calling out is strong. There have been criticisms of some certain statements made by the Chief Justice, but never any suggestion that in his capacity as the person presiding over that court, he's done anything untoward. And in fact, he will go down in history, whatever he might do now, as the author of the eNCA decision that was landmarked internationally for asserting the primacy of our Constitution, of its values, of the things that we were fighting for when we were in the trenches, fighting for freedom. It was a moment of such great pride. I remember I was rushing to catch my plane in Joburg, and a big, burly African man flung his arms around me. I almost missed my plane. He said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." I said, "I've been off the court for 5 years." He just said, "Thank you." And I think he was expressing something deep from the bowels and the heart and the spirit of the nation at that moment. So I think the criticisms that come to the judiciary, many people are saying, are coming primarily from people who don't want to be accountable for what they've done and are being held to account by the judiciary, who are being asked to tell the truth to the commission of inquiry that's been set up. They are the people who've been the main critics of the judiciary, and one can understand from a human point of view why they fear the judiciary, but without agreeing in the slightest with the criticisms that they're making. Of course, judges are not above criticism, and I wrote a very strong judgment when we had to deal with the case called scandalizing the judiciary, that we've got to take it on the chin. When you take on position as a judge, you'll expect criticism. You take it on the chin. You don't get all huffy and puffy about it.
So, Justice Sachs, how do we, what does follow-through look like then from what you've described of the current tenure of Chief Justice Mogoeng? What should President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Judicial Services Commission and everyone else involved in that Section 174 process to replace Justice Mogoeng at the end of his tenure? What should they be looking for in a candidate for Chief Justice?
Well, it's very much the President, because it's not the Judicial Service Commission who interviews and nominates or gives a list to the President. Our Constitution allowed for the key position of somebody whose powers in a way are equal to the powers of the President in terms of his judicial authority, head of the court. The President makes a choice, and then that person goes to the Judicial Service Commission to be vetted, as it were. And for me, it's the 4 C's: courage, collegiality, civility, and craft. They're all important, but number 1 is courage. By courage, I don't mean that you take on enemies and smite your enemies oblivious of pain. I mean the courage of your convictions, the courage that comes from defending the core values, the courage that comes with virtue, with integrity. That quality comes number 1. Collegiality. You're the head of a team. You're not the boss. You're one amongst equals, but you're the head of the team in that sense, like a captain. And you've got to get on with colleagues. And you don't get onto that court if you're a kind of namby-pamby, easygoing person. The people who get onto that court are people with fire in their bellies, with spirit, with conviction, with intelligence, sharpness. And you've got to deal with them and encourage their sharpness and intelligence. That's collegiality. Courtesy. You've got to speak with dignity and the correct way to your colleagues, to counsel. Litigants must hear it, to members of the public at all stages. You've got to be actually an epitome of courtesy. And craft. I mentioned craft last. That's technical skills, legal skills. You don't have to do it all on your own. You've got 10 other colleagues who are helping you all the time. We've got law clerks helping you. But craft is you add that something extra, that X factor. And we had people like Arthur Chesterton and Pius Blanca, Sandile Ngcobo. I worked with Ismail Mohammed. Did I mention Sandile Ngcobo? Wonderful Dikha Moseneki. Combined all those different elements in different degrees. Yeah. So it's a hard act to follow. But I think we've got the talent in South Africa. We've got one area where we've been strong, and our court has become renowned internationally, sure, is in terms of that legal capacity to combine empathy, compassion, heart, with thoughtfulness, with clarity of exposition, with courtesy. I think there'll be a big pool of people, yeah, of men and women, from which Cyril Ramaphosa will be able to choose.
Justice Sachs, Professor Hugh Corder, writing in The Conversation, talks about the need for that individual to also be a proponent of the transformative nature of the constitutional framework. Now, much work has been done in sort of channeling that transformative power of our Constitution, but many would say not enough. It's not gone to the full extent in the last 27 years. How important will it be that the next Chief Justice is a proponent, as Professor Corder suggests, of the transformative nature of our constitutional framework into the next 12 years or so?
That's an absolute given. In fact, it was the Constitutional Court that first coined the phrase transformative constitution. The court was a pioneer in that regard, and in relation to issues of gender, in relation to issues of voting rights, in relation to issues of land reform, a whole range of questions. The court has been at the spearhead, if you like, of demanding transformation. So that's an absolute necessity. But there's a big pool of people from whom Cyril Ramaphosa can draw who all got that quality.
And lastly, this conversation about whether or not a Deputy Chief Justice necessarily ought to, ascend and head up the judicial arm of the state, or, in terms of the goal of a transformed judiciary being representative, not just only in terms of the racial, composition of the population, but also issues of gender being factored into there. How much of a feature should that be in the conversation about the next Chief Justice?
Well, I think one of the very strong candidates has to be Raymond Zondo. In my view, he's doing an outstanding job as head of the commission, quite extraordinary. We see him day in and day out. Very tough assignment he's got. So clearly he must be a very, very strong candidate. But there are many other candidates, and in the case of the present Chief Justice, Dikgang Moseneke was passed over. Absolutely brilliant, a marvelous colleague, a great judge. But Mogoeng delivered the goods in the sense of he rose to the occasion, he learned on the job, and he provided inspiring leadership at moments when it really mattered. So it's not a necessity that the deputy takes on the position, but clearly here we have a candidate who happens to be Deputy Chief Justice, who also has been performing with great skill in terms of the commission. But there are many other people who would also have to be considered, men and women.
Is it of any significance any longer that President Cyril Ramaphosa, firstly in his capacity as ANC president, then as president of the Republic and former deputy president of the Republic, will testify at the Zondo Commission, juxtaposed against, the issue of former President Jacob Zuma absolutely refusing to testify before Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo and the Commission. And perhaps if you take a longer view and you juxtapose against former President Nelson Mandela's, agreeing to testify, heeding the summons to testify at that SARFU court case while he was a sitting president, and former president, the second last president of apartheid, P.W. Botha, refusing to testify before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I remember P.W. Botha, his supporters were saying the tiger will never appear. And in the end, it was a black African man, magistrate. He appeared in the court, and he sentenced him to pay a fine, and he immediately paid the fine. He wasn't defiant, and outside the critics were saying, what's happened to the tiger? Meow, meow. Now he climbed down, Botha climbed down at that stage. I think what's relevant in South Africa is the supremacy of the Constitution, that no one is above the Constitution, not even the President. And so the President will be testifying not once but twice as President of the country and as head of the ANC, and he accepts that position. And I think that's absolutely a model stance that he's adopting. And I have absolutely no doubt that the Raymond Zondo, his capacity as commissioner, will put him in the spotlight and ask questions vigorously to get to the truth. It won't be mealy-mouthed at all. And it's interesting. But I personally happen to have great respect for the two individuals concerned, that their personal integrity will completely surpass any personal convictions that they might have in terms of what will the consequences be if I ask questions that are too tough. Maybe I won't become Chief Justice. I think it's absolutely impossible that would occupy the minds of Raymond Zondo. And I also can't believe that Cyril Ramaphosa in any way favor or disfavor Zondo because of the toughness of his questions. I think both of them are strong-minded enough to relish and respect the capacity of the individuals they're concerned with fulfilling their responsibilities first, That will be more important than anything else.
Justice Albie Sachs, I've got to thank you for your generosity with your time. I have great respect for you and the work that you have done. It is a well-known fact that you were one of the engineers behind the crafting, the initial phases of the crafting of our Constitution. And I don't know how many times I've read your book, Oliver Tambo's Dream, and really just the exposition of the role that Oliver Tambo and influence that he had in crafting the Constitution that we now have in South Africa. Thank you for your time, sir.